At certain times of year, basil is abundant, more than you can use at that point in time. And as you move towards colder weather, rather than moving plants inside, you may want to go ahead and use some way to preserve it. Now you can easily do that by freezing. Most common is drying, but freezing works particularly well with some of the milder flavored herbs. Basil is a good example. Parsley is another one. And so what you do is go out and harvest. Bring it in, preferably before it's floured, when it's going to have a better taste. Make sure you wash it, and then make sure you dry it well if you're going to preserve it in oil. If you're going to preserve it in water, the drying step is not as much, it's not as critical. Here I've used a salad spinner, but you could also pat it dry depending on how much you're working with. One method may work better than the other. This one is basil, and as you can see, I've already washed it, dried it, and cut it, and it's already starting to turn dark, which is one of the reasons we want to move as quickly as we can when you're working with basil, because it does go black. So two of the methods that we have to do this are, actually there's 3 or 4, but I've got an ice cube tray that I pretty much dedicate to using with herbs, because it's going to absorb some of the flavors of those herbs, and using it for chilling water later or soda is not going to be quite as nice. And what you're going to do is, I've got each of them filled about halfway, and you put about a tablespoon to 2 tablespoons of water in each of the little cubes. And you'll find that basil that's frozen has a much fresher flavor than basil that is dried. So this is a nice way to go, whether you're doing it in mass, or if you're doing some dried, that's great too, but doing some of it this way is a good plan. All right, these you would fill up all the rest of the way, and when you get them all filled, you stick them directly in the freezer. Now you'll notice that some of them are still sticking out of the water a little bit, and we're going to handle that when we come back tomorrow. These will be frozen solid at this point, and we're going to take some water, and we're just going to pour water over the frozen cubes, and that will add water to the top. That will cover it the rest of the way and seal it. You let that freeze for a few hours until it's solid, and then you can bag it up like this. And you have, in this case, parsley, but because I did this one yesterday, but you have herbs that you can throw in. These don't work well as a garnish. They don't work well for eating fresh in many ways, but they do work great in cooking. The problem with doing it as a cube is now you have to let it thaw. If you're making a soup, no problem, you just throw it in and it melts. But if you're making a sauce, this kind of thing doesn't melt evenly, and so you get either the sauce becomes overcooked, or it takes too long to cook because you've thrown ice in there. So we have an alternative method, that a couple of them actually, that work very nicely as well. So what I have is, we take oil, take about 2 cups of the herb that you want to work with, and pour oil over it, 1/3 to 1/2 cup. Now when you're cooking with it, you're going to have to take that into account, that there's oil in there too. Just stir those together well until they're blended, and then you have a couple of ways that you can pack it. One is to pack it into a nice canning jar. Again, I wouldn't use plastic because of the ability of the herbs to absorb flavor, and also for the ability of the herbs to take their flavors, somehow get out of the jar and flavor everything else in your freezer. But these, you can see, because it's oil, it never freezes solid. And so you can always pull some out. Again, this is parsley, but you do the exact same thing with the basil that we have here. And then you can take out what you need. It may freeze a little bit more solid than this because I'm outside, we've had it out with us for a little while, and it's softened up a little bit. Then this is going to go directly into the freezer, and that works great. Just make sure you label it. Another alternative that might work better for you is to take that same mixture and freeze it into a bag flat, getting as much air out of it as you can as you freeze it. Again, this won't freeze solid, so you can just take out, break off, spoon out the amount that you need, and it adds to sauces and that kind of thing extremely well. So those are 3 quick methods that you can use to preserve herbs by freezing. It's a great way, gives you a fresher flavor, and it's nice to have something like that makes summer come back in the dead of winter. I hope you'll try it. For Oklahoma Gardening, I'm Barbara Brown.
hope you enjoyed this video. It's part of our Oklahoma Gardening YouTube channel. You can also find even more videos on our OK Gardening Classics YouTube channel. And join us on social media for great gardening tips, photos, and discussion.